Thanks a lot for having me today. I'm really happy to be part of the first TDD International Conference. And today's talk, TDD Misconceptions, is going to be based on basically my experience and my misconceptions, my misunderstanding I've had on the real life projects. And I want to show what basically made me reconsider my attitude regarding the TDD. And once again, my name is Olena Borzenko, and you can find me on Twitter. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free. Don't hesitate to reach out. I will be happy to chat. So also, I want to say a couple of words actually about my experience and who I am. I originally from Ukraine, and currently, as was already mentioned, I live in Berlin, in Germany. I started my career in IT in Ukraine in a company called Alex. It was a service company. And I'm mentioning this because exactly in this company, I had an opportunity to work on many, many different projects, on startup projects or enterprise applications and much more. And basically there I learned a lot about TDD, BDD, and other practices and approaches. After that, when I moved to Berlin, I started to work in Dus Express, which is a German beverages delivery service. And after this, I started my journey at the Adecco Group. It's for now it's been like only 2 weeks, so I actually also knew this company. And not wasting time. So what is actually the deal with TDD? Why I want to talk about this? I cannot say that I use TDD on every single project I've had in my experience, but there were a couple of them. And I cannot say that every experience I've had was a successful, completely the opposite. At some point in my career, I was actually against TDD, and I was genuinely afraid because many times when I was working with kind of TDD, it was overcomplicated and very, very time-consuming. So I want to share what exactly was happening and what kind of lessons I've learned from this experience. So everything basically started to go in a wrong way from the very, very beginning. As a junior developer, and I don't know, maybe 6 months of my career, and I was working on a project, and we were supposed to use TDD. And I was told that TDD is when you write all the tests before implementing the business logic. Not saying too much, that was kind of my reaction. I was not able to understand why and how is it possible. And I was not alone in this reaction. We had a team where it was like a couple of junior developers and maybe 1 or 2 senior people. And everyone of my level had exactly the same reaction. So why not? Why we were scared? Why we didn't want to use this? Besides natural reasons that we had not enough understanding and we were not experienced enough, there were a bit more. The first of all, it was a small startup project where we were rushing and we had very, very tight deadlines. So sometimes customers were giving us requirements and user stories, and on the next day, mood changed, and then they want something else. So in my hand, when I was thinking like how it's going to work, if you would start writing tests before, and all tests, not only single tests, but all tests before trying to implement any business logic, we will be just stuck in an endless loop of rewriting tests over and over again. Without tests, of course, we were also rewriting code because the customers were changing their opinions and requirements, but at least we were able to move slowly forward, trying to deliver at least small pieces of functionality, and at least it was working somehow. And again, confusion in the team was growing with every second after this announcement about TDD. Especially the reason for this was that not only we had no understanding of those processes and different practices and how to work with this, we also not very experienced with the test itself, whether it's integration, functional, or unit tests. Of course, some of us, we learned what is this. We had a bit of practice and we tried a couple of times to write tests, But to really write useful tests, it does require, after all, some time and some investment to learn how to do this. And
Olena, I've been getting some messages that says you do have some slides for this. You need to share your screen so I can add them to the stream. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, of course I do. I'm perfectly showing the presentation all this time. So
there we go. Okay.
Yes.
But you know what? Well, you know what, Olena, you're doing fine without slides. We could perfectly follow.
Yeah, I'm perfectly going on the slides, and I'm absolutely convinced that everything's good. I just have two screens, and the browser was hidden. So thanks a lot for.
I was enjoying your talk. I don't think you need slides, basically. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I guess I will just keep from this point. It's basically the first slide when there is some text on it. Before it was just some pictures. Yes. So we had no idea actually how to write tests properly as well. And the last thing, besides lack of knowledge and experience, we also were not able to understand why someone would use TDD and why someone would develop the project in this way. Because now, with the experience, I do understand, given a bit of spoiler, that of course it's helping you to improve your design. It's maybe time consuming from the beginning, but after all, in the long term, it can save you a lot of time. It can help you to keep your code clean and have a documentation basically in your code. But back then, I had absolutely no vision and not a single reason in my head why I should consider it. The next time when I met TDD, I met it in the form of found the bug, fix it, write a test to prove it was fixed. It was quite an interesting statement of TDD, and the basically first thought in my head when I heard about this, that if no one found the bug, it means that it does not exist at your code at all, because we had no test, no consistent test, I would say, in the code. We were not covering the business logic, and it means that the only way to actually find the defect if it was missed during the development process is if the customer or the users will go and write in support that something doesn't work. So did it work? Of course, it's not. But it was helping at some point, that at least we were sure that we would not have the same defects again. But it did not work in the long term, and especially from the quality perspective of the product itself. The code coverage was very inconsistent. When we were writing complicated features, and well, not we, there was senior developers, they were writing complicated features, they were covering them with tests. So we junior developers would not break them. But all the other features, especially the small ones, because again, we were working on a project with the deadlines where we're supposed to deliver as fast as possible. If there is a way to avoid writing tests, we were doing this. So we give feature and testing. Okay, we have a defect. We wrote one test to cover this defect, and we are moving forward. In the end, when new developers were joining the team, they were very confused because it was very inconsistent. Where's the rest of the tests? What is happening? And so on and so on. So also those tests which we were writing for our defects were usually written to ensure code quality, if our implementation is correct. Because most of the times we had quite good user story descriptions. And most of the problems were the wrong exception message or something, the null was accepted and not validated and not needed, and so on and so on. So that kind of details, which actually implementation details. So we were writing tests to be sure that our code implemented correctly and not that actually business logic works. So as a result, no guarantee that application in our product was actually working as it should work. And the last one, before I actually learned about TDD more and actually started to understand how to use it, the last drop in the ocean was 100% coverage. And I'm sure that everyone who is watching and who is practicing TDD would say, but that's correct. That's how it should be. when you're using TDD, you have 100% code coverage ideally, because you first write tests and only then you implement your functionality. The problem in this case was that we were not writing tests first. We were writing code, and then we were trying to cover it with tests. This case was also could be. There is another kind of common misconception about TDD that everything needs unit tests. So with this 100% code coverage, besides this number, we were also trying to cover everything with unit tests. So as a result, we had very interesting tests. They were most of the times useless, and they were written just to ensure that the line was green during the code coverage inspection, and it was not actually helpful, and completely the opposite actually. So something went wrong again on the project, and besides that, it was really, really hard and complicated to keep that coverage because we had a lot of functionality and product was quite big and complicated. We had a lot of mocks. We were mocking everything, and we were trying to write tests for every single combination of what can happen with those mocks. I mean, it became obvious that not everything needs to be tested only when we realized how much time and energy we invest in this process. But the main problem, that the critical defects were still there. Every time when we were given features, when we got given code for testing, we were like surprised from the amount of how many defects we were receiving back, how many defects were reported. And of course, again, the same thing. Tests were about code quality, about the actual implementation, and it was quite rarely that test was actually representing what is happening in the code. So, as I mentioned before, I would say it again because it was really, really a huge deal. The development time was significantly increased because of this. If you spent on your feature, for example, 1 day, you needed like 2 more days to actually cover all this with tests and ensure that everything, like the 100% code coverage. The same situation was if you have changes in requirements and you go and fix the all functionality, again, you have to spend twice as much time to go and fix all the tests which are related to this feature. And it's not because something really, really changed, not always because something really changed in behavior, in how your code works. Sometimes you just moved things around and all the tests failed. Luckily, during this period, I had an opportunity to work within the same customer in the same company, but I had another project and another approach. It was also test first, but it was not test-driven development, it was behavior-driven development. We were using BDD. So when we were receiving a story we need to implement, the description of the story was written as a scenarios. So we were taking those scenarios and we were implementing tests exactly the same as a description. And of course, after this, we were doing one test is a scenario, then we were implementing code, and basically red-green refactor process going in cycles. So the main difference between those two projects, as I said already before, we were first writing tests. And not all the tests, only one. As I said already, one scenario, we were taking the scenario and we were writing tests. The difference was that because everything was clear and we had those scenarios was very structured and it was easy to write tests first. Sometimes I, as a developer, was not writing any tests. I was sharing this responsibility with some other developers or maybe QA guys. They were taking the user story, they were writing tests, and they were giving them to me when they were failing, and I was implementing the business logic. So I was writing only code which is actually needed. I was not trying to write code before any test. I was not trying to make everything work from the very beginning and then like fix defects. I had the red tests, I wrote code, done. And also, the difference was when we had 100% code coverage rule, we were writing, as I already mentioned, all the different possible combinations of mocks. We were writing a lot of tests which were completely useless just to cover all the lines. In this case, we were writing only the tests which were representing scenarios in the user stories. And basically, that was, I would say, the great moment that when I finally realized, and well, this cute squirrel added only for dramatic effect, when I finally realized that everything what I knew before about TDD was not actually wrong. It was, all the statements were kind of correct. The problem was that when we were trying to adopt TDD process, like practice, try to use it, we were trying to use separate statements. So like either 100% code coverage or maybe write tests first. And the problem was that we needed to use all this together and just follow the step by step without jumping back and forth. So my conclusion is basically based on my experience, what I did after going through this process, that first of all, the TDDs, when you write a single test, we already know this. We watch it fail, and only after that we implement the code. I knew this already. I knew this from the very, very beginning when I was just trying to understand what is TDD. But it was really hard to understand how does it work in practice. And when I had this opportunity to work with BDD, it just showed me how could it work, because we were practicing pair programming as well. So one person is writing test and I'm implementing the business logic, I'm implementing the code. We were trying to move with like step by step without taking too much work in the meantime. So one test and implementation, one test and implementation. And that was that gave me understanding and actually practice. We were practicing quite a lot with this approach. How does it actually works? And I realized that this approach is actually, it sounds a bit scary. Like, how could you write tests before? Like, you don't know anything. How could it work? What could be a design? But on the practice, when you try it over and over again, it's becoming very, very easy, because you're starting to think like in your test, you are also putting a bit of like design basis for the better design, basically. And that was the second item I wanted to say, that it's not forcing you to create a best design ever, or like perfect code, perfect test, perfect whatever. It just assists you in better software design, and it's helping you to have those like small modules and small pieces, small logical pieces of your code, because otherwise you cannot write your tests ahead. And again, that was something I knew and something we all read about in books, and there is tons of articles about this. But that was exactly what I saw when I was writing those tests after I already tried BDD, and then I was working on the projects when we actually were using TDD, and that was successful projects. And I had a couple of projects when we had really, really positive experience. And that when I realized, when I was looking at my tests, that they actually implicitly like forced me to like design my code in a much better way, in a much more like clear understanding and better implementation afterwards. And easier to refactor and hand over your code. This was the first moment when I realized that it's very, very easy to hand over your code. Again, when I had this changing moment when I was working with BDD, and I saw we were using Cucumber framework, and we had those tests written as a scenarios, like given when then, and so on. And I was working, the project was 20 years old, with quite a lot of legacy parts and legacies. Quite a lot of legacy parts, basically. But even then, it was quite easy for me when I had a defect, or maybe I needed to change something. It was quite easy for me to go find the test or find the piece of code and actually read what it's doing. And especially if I was able to find a test which is responsible for this on another feature, it was very easy to understand what is happening there because it was really written like a documentation. And of course, with TDD, it's like we don't usually use Cucumber framework for TDD approach. But I'm just saying that it was the first moment when I saw that tests actually can be readable and can be a documentation in your code. So after this, I already knew how it's supposed to be, and it was much, much easier to then work with TDD approach. And the refactoring, of course, easier, as I mentioned before, because the design is kind of improving, and we implicitly forced to write better code, it's becoming much easier to refactor and make any changes in your code. And just a few more things. If all the previous statements I said, they were basically, I knew them, but I understood actually how to properly use them from my own experience. There are a couple more which I just really like, and I want to mention as a part of this presentation. The first thing is TDD is very time consuming. And as I said, when I had no understanding of what TDD is, I had exactly the same opinion and the same vision. For me, it was very complicated, very hard. Like, you have to put your mind, like, to first write tests, you have to think of all the possible things, you have to think how to design it, you have to write it. And for me, it was like, it's just too complicated. Can I just sit and write code immediately? Like, it will be much easier. Like, why should I suffer and do this thing? Like, I was not able to understand it. I thought that it will just, with time, make it more and more harder as the code will grow, the code base will grow. And this is basically not true, because the big companies like Microsoft and IBM, they were adopting the TDD practice, and they proved that it's actually not true. And pre-release defects density of the four products decreased between 40 and 90%. This is just a quote I really liked when they basically from their experience. They finding they actually really proved in real life, on a real project, that TDD can improve and can make the product better, the implementation phase. And the next thing also, red, green, and always refactor. This is also another misconception and misunderstanding I hear quite often. And this is not true. Especially if you are working on a project which is like quite big, and as I said before, I was working sometimes on with the legacy systems. There already, most of the functionality are there, and sometimes for me, implementing a feature was like a plain Lego. I was just taking bricks and just putting them together, calling the function which is already there, or calling some methods and saving some data, getting some data. It was just the way how I basically implement the step-by-step feature which is described. And there was no refactor was needed at this moment. Sometimes I was just writing from the first time feature and it was done. It was working. No refactor was applied. And I also like this quote, which is related to this misconception that perfect is the enemy of good. It's also it's not only about old and big projects or like stable projects where you don't really need to refactor something. It's also about that sometimes you are getting lost and going in this like state when you're trying to make it perfect, and you do this again and again, and refactoring and moving, and then you're just wasting a lot of times, when in the end, 1 week after, you will come and look in this code and you will have exactly the same opinion as before, that this code is ugly and you want to rewrite it again. So it doesn't really worth it to just refactor for refactoring and just do this to make it perfect, because perfect software not exist, and better to do something good, which is works, easy to understand, which is high quality without defects. And then if you want to refactor, maybe do this later when you really have time and mood for this. And the other thing, a simple code need no tests. This is also, like, I hear quite often, and even not about TDD or like, it's just if you just have unit tests, if you just have like integration tests, I hear it quite often that that's just simple function, that's just simple story, like I don't need tests, this is obvious that it works, like there is no way that it would not work. And that's not true, because our tests are also the specification on what the code is actually should do, and the implementation is how the problem is solved itself. So regardless if it's small, if it's simple, if it's obvious it works or not, it's good to have tests, especially when some new developer might join, or maybe you would forget 1 year after what you did and you would start making changes. It doesn't matter how simple it is, you can just forget about something and you will break some functionality. So with tests, you will have documentation and specification of actually what is going on in there, and you will have kind of insurance that, okay, it's gonna work, and if something will break, the test will show me that something's actually wrong. And at this point, I would say thanks everyone for attention, and this is the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoy, and if you have any questions, as already mentioned, feel free to write me, and that's all.